Okay, here we go. Welcome to my channel. I can't believe I'm saying this. So my name is Alice, and I'm a translator and interpreter. I was born in Australia, but I live in Paris, and I like books. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Basically, in this video, I wanted to give you some recommendations for my favorite French books, but I realized that was far too overwhelming. Far too overwhelming. So I decided just to go around my tiny Parisian apartment. I basically live in a garret. I reckon I'm probably about to become a great artist or die of consumption or both, because I'm just in one of those really typical tiny one-bedroom things up the top of one of those typical Parisian buildings, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Anyway, pending my great art career and early death, we will be talking about some random books that I found in my tiny apartment, which does not have, nearly enough room for the amount of books that I would like to own. And I'm not doing them in any particular order. It's just going to be smallest to biggest in order of size. Not that size is important in any way. The first book we have here today is called Être ici est une splendeur by Marie Dariussec. So it is about the life of Paula Becker, who was a painter in Germany around the turn of the century, and she had this very, very brief and beautiful life that Dariussec explains very simply. She did a lot of research reading her letters and her diaries, and basically, how could I describe this book? It's there's something meditative about it. There's something sort of deceptively simple about it. It's kind of, you take a step back and look at life through the lens of this, like I say, brief and beautiful life of this one pretty amazing female painter who did some actually quite revolutionary things for her time. There wasn't a lot of self-portraiture, let alone nude self-portraiture, let alone nude pregnant self-portraiture back in the day. So yeah, I feel like her life is just this illustration of someone who tried to do as much as possible with the limited options that were available to her as a young woman at the time. And I really like Marie Dariussec. My first Dariussec was Truism, which is pigtails in English, which I believe was translated by Penny Houston. This in English was translated by Penny Houston, and the English title is Being Here, The Life of Paula Modersohn-Becker. And I highly recommend you check it out. There is it's just, how would you say, pipite. It's a little gem. Moving on. This one, I love this book. Hang on.
Atmosphère! Atmosphère! Est-ce que c'est une gueule d'atmosphère?
This book, Hôtel du Nord, is basically a series of vignettes around the patrons of a particular hotel in Paris. Hôtel du Nord is a little slice of life of Paris between the two world wars. Basically, this couple, not this couple, but the couple, there is the couple, Émile and Louise Lécouvre, by this hotel, and we follow their lives and the lives of the hotel patrons who kind of come and go, and it's a really interesting slice of working class Parisian life at the time. Of course, it was adapted into quite a famous film by Michel Carnet, which I highly recommend that you watch if you haven't. It might be easier to get a hold of for the English speakers than an English translation, which I unfortunately could not find. Apparently it does exist, and it was translated, I think, in the 60s by someone called Homer P. Earl. I don't know why why did I say that in a French way? He was American. But yeah, I think it's quite difficult to find a copy, but you can enjoy the film, which is really beautiful, but kind of different from the book, which is quite it's just this series of little vignettes of life, and you get kind of attached to the characters, but they're almost like short stories, so you don't necessarily have all the details of what happens next, but it feels very true to life, and it is in fact based on Jean Drabet's parents, who owned a hotel at that time, and he grew up there with them. So I think a lot of the scenes are actually based on real life people, and you can really feel that, and it kind of took me away and took me home, because I actually live about 5 minutes away from the actual Hôtel du Nord, which is an actual place which you can visit in Paris, but now it's a fancy restaurant. Quite different to back in the day. Okay, next up we have Sandal, Le Rouge et le Noir. Le Rouge et le Noir it's a freaking romp, guys. It's great. It is it's a really another sort of interesting look at French society, but from a very different time period and from a very different perspective. So basically this is during the Bourbon Restoration, so sometime between like post-revolution, but like between like Napoleon coming and going, and it's quite interesting because you see the character is a big admirer of Napoleon, but then kind of has to hide that because he's also incredibly ambitious, and that is kind of the driver of this book and this story. This young man who comes out of poverty and he climbs up the social ladder, and he's really quite ruthless. In a way, it actually reminded me of Maupassant's Bel Ami, if you know that one. That's another favorite of mine. But yeah, Julien Sorel is just a fascinating character, not a particularly likable character, kind of a ridiculous character in some ways, which surprised me. The descriptions you get of the book don't always let you know how kind of ruthless Sandal is with his character, while all at the same time I almost kind of get the feeling that maybe Sorel is like also in some ways Sandal himself, although I'm basing that on basically nothing. It's just a vibe that I get from the book. Anyway, it's it really also this copy has like, I think it's like a school copy. It has like educational notes in the middle of like, you know, what was actually happening at the time, historical context, which you may actually need. I mean, I don't think you need it because you can just enjoy the story, but you kind of want it. It really made me want to know more about the period and start do some research. And yeah, so I cannot advise you, unfortunately, on which translation to get, because this monster has been translated about at least 6 different times. From like in the 1920s, Scott Moncrief, who was quite prolific translator, translated it. Some people think his version is a bit too flowery. The latest one was by Raymond and Mackenzie in 2022, so that's quite a recent translation. It might be worth checking out, but I haven't actually read any of them, so you know, enjoy doing your own research. I thought it was quite interesting as well that like the English version it's usually translated The Black and the Red, which is literally the title. It's a literal translation of the title. However, it's also been translated Black and Red or Scarlet and Red. I quite like Scarlet and Red, but because it's quite ambiguous as to why he named it The Black and the Red, there are certain theories. It's kind of hard to calm down on, what is the best translation, but like Scarlet and the Red for the vibes. Okay, next up. Oh, guys, you're in for a treat. If I was more prepared, I would have more to say about this book, but I actually haven't read it yet. I'm picking this up because I became obsessed with Marianne Ndiaye, the author of this book, who is a Goncourt Prize winning French author, very prolific, very interesting. She won the Prix Goncourt which is basically the Booker or the Miles Franklin or the but French equivalent. Her literary universe is really like stepping into another dimension. It's not that makes it sound like science fiction. It's not science fiction. It's more like it's got magical realism touches to it a lot of the time. It's got sort of absurdist and surreal elements to it. It's also very psychological. It's one of those kinds of... She writes often from inside the head of a particular character, and you feel just sort of stuck there in a web of their thoughts, and sometimes it gets quite dark. But it is a ride, and I find her really fascinating. And so this is the next one on my list, but I have so far read Three Strong Women, which was the prize-winning book, which is very intense. And also, I think it's really interesting in terms of her characters are very complex and flawed and contingent, but they are strong in their own ways, in a very human way. It's not what you think of when people say a strong female character. They're allowed to be themselves, and there is a certain there is a resilience to them, which is really interesting. And what else can I say about her? I think you should be prepared to go on a journey, prepared to just go with it when you read her writing, prepared to go to some strange and sometimes dark places. Her latest book, La Vengeance m'appartient, Vengeance is Mine, features a woman who kills her children. It's not very graphic, but it is very disturbing. Yes. And I had the immense privilege of meeting her earlier in the year. She was invited to be interviewed in front of students for their NYU Creative Writing program, which takes place partially in Paris. And she was interviewed by the wonderful Katie Kitamura, who is also a wonderful author, but that is another story for another time. And I thought the way she spoke about her writing was really interesting. She seemed to say that she was almost obliged to become a writer because she didn't seem to fit in anywhere else. And yeah. Anyway, that is... Oh yeah, did I say that I interpreted for her? Because the creative writing students don't necessarily speak French, even if they come to Paris. So Marianne Diaye was more comfortable expressing herself in French, and I was lucky enough to be her interpreter on that day. And having had a bit of a breath and a little bit of a break from her world since then, I am ready to soon dive back in with Ladivine, which is translated by Jordan Stump. Most of her work has been translated by Jordan Stump, except for Three Strong Women, which I believe was translated by someone else. I'll put it here. Now, moving on, another beautiful Gallimard cover. This is La Danseuse by Patrick Mondiano. In English it is Ballerina, translated by... I always have to name the translator. I'm a translator, so obviously I always have to name the translator. Marc Polizotti. Marc Polizotti. This is quite a dreamy little book. Yeah, very short, very concise. I think the Deceptively Simple is another good description of Mondiano's work. He's probably better known for La Rue des Boutiques Obscures in English, which has been translated as Missing Persons by Denise Weisbord. And I'm sorry, I keep checking my notes. This is my very first video. You'll have to be hopefully a bit indulgent with me. Yeah, this is just, I found this really, there's something actually quite ethereal about it. I think because it's almost like he's infused some of the Aryan quality of the dancer into the writing, although his writing is always a little bit sort of, I don't know, like a mist that kind of escapes you, because his work is very much concerned with memory. He starts off questioning the hair color of the main character. Does he remember what she looked like, even though the whole book is named after her? There are so many things that are so many questions left unanswered. You kind of deep dive into memory and come up, I don't know, with strange objects, and you're not quite sure if they're the right ones. It's very much like Missing Person, which is basically, it's also a really fascinating concept. Basically a guy with amnesia who's trying to figure out who he is. It's like a detective novel, but doesn't actually conform to the genre. And La Danseuse has some of those kinds of elements as well. It's basically like this delicate kind of work of art that I recommend it as an experience. Last but most certainly not least, another very, very wonderful author who I had the immense privilege of interpreting for when her book The Years came out. Goodness me, in 2018, I think, in English. I think it was published more like around 2006 in French, I'm not sure. This is her complete works, given to me by a friend. I have not read all of them, but I highly recommend dipping into any of her work. Particularly The Years is a really fascinating book. It's a kind of it's a kind of essay slash memoir slash autobiography, but it's not. It's almost like the autobiography of her time, of the different eras that she's lived through, from the 40s into the 2000s, and it's people talk about it as almost a work of sociology, because she really doesn't focus on herself. In fact, interestingly, it's a kind of autobiography, but that never ever ever uses the word je. She never uses the word I, which is quite which obviously is quite the it's quite difficult. I was talking to her translator Alison Strayer about it at the launch of the Years in English, and I don't know how she managed that. I don't know how she managed to translate an entire autobiography without ever using I in English, because there are ways and means of doing that in French which are much more natural, and to find a natural way to do it in English would be very, very difficult. But despite the fact that I haven't read the whole English translation, I have no troubles recommending it, particularly because it was nominated for a Booker Prize. Annie Ernaux herself has also won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2022. I think, what is so interesting about her work is that it's a commentary on society through a personal lens. It's also, there is something very immersive about her writing. It's very easy to kind of dive into, and she's just a really, really smart woman. I found interpreting for her almost easy, in the sense that she expresses herself so clearly, that she can synthesize complex ideas into beautiful sentences. Obviously, that's her job, but that made my job a lot easier, so thank you, Annie. And that about wraps it up. There are so many more books that I could talk about, and perhaps we'll talk about, but that is another story for another time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and do all the things. Okay, bye.